Thank you for the introduction, Luca. Good to have you here today. Good to meet you in person.
Likewise.
Since it's just the two of us, feel free to also make it conversational. If there's stuff you want to put out there or lines of conversation that you want to start, feel free as well.
I'm ready to go.
All right. So to get us kicked off, how are you thinking about NFTs today? I think we've seen several metas over the last year and a half, 2 years. Where do you think it's moving? Where do you think we are right now?
Yeah, I think it's kind of purging all of the nonsense, and I think we're at a new phase for the space. I think that phase is going to be built around sustainable models that meet consumers where they are, not traders where they are.
And when you say meet consumers where they are, do you mean that as in people who aren't necessarily in the crypto arena right now?
I think it's anybody. I think it's anybody who is just a consumer is a broad term. So a consumer can be somebody who knows crypto. A consumer can be somebody who doesn't. But I think right now the mechanic and the value proposition was always catered to a trader. And a trader is not necessarily a consumer. I think looking at the token systematically like a token and not like an actual value proposition outside of it being just a low supply token that can go up in price quickly. And so as time will go on further, I think the space is going to evolve into a more consumer-oriented place. And that's just meeting them where they love. Is that content? Is that product? Is that story? Is that community? We don't really know yet. I have my own thesis. I think it's all of the above. But we've seen this, hundreds of times before. Plenty of brands have already built this base and this collector base and this fandom. And I think NFTs don't need to reinvent the wheel. They just need to leverage the technology that this stuff is built upon to build something that I think moves quicker, has better value propositions, and ultimately is just a better product. And so how do you take a collectible market? How do you take a fandom market? How do you take all of these markets that are already existing and already thriving? And how do you build on top of that?
So I think you hit on something really interesting there, which is sort of moving away from this thought process of NFTs as fungible tokens in the same way we think of the tokens that we trade on the day-to-day, and moving back to it from appreciation of those few things that you listed. But if I look back, I feel like CryptoPunks kind of were that appreciation of this community, of this art, of this aesthetic, and then we moved away from that. And what do you think was the cause that there was that move to making these more just purely tradable assets?
I think it was part of the culture, or part of, when you look at crypto and you look at NFTs and you look at one of their main backbones of adoption, I think FOMO has played a huge part in that. And narratives, I think, have done, really well in convincing people to spend their capital in certain directions. In this situation, I think there needs to be a new narrative, one that isn't built off of profit taking and yielding higher returns, though you understand the dynamic of that space and why that is important, and that's not important. But these things, I think, are greater than that. I think certain projects trailblazed that narrative, and a lot of people saw huge migrations of wealth and stories and testimonials that I think everybody dreams of when they're not in the place they want to be financially. And I think that leads, certain behavioral patterns. But at the end of the day, the NFT is a better collectible. Looking at it in any greater or any different capacity than that, I think is trying to cater to a value proposition and to an objective that I don't think is pure. I think ultimately people are optimizing for, either the founders are optimizing for their own wealth or communities are optimizing for theirs. And again, there's something okay about that. I think capitalism breeds innovation, but at a certain point, the value proposition has to be deeper and it has to be better. And so this transition will happen at the end of the day. If you look at collectibles, it's I think a $426 billion market. Trading collectibles today and buying and selling collectibles today has a lot of friction, spoofing issues, inauthenticity issues, shipping issues, insurance issues. There's space issues, storage issues. There's a plethora of issues with physically collecting. And everybody loves to physically collect it. It's a market that's only going to grow bigger as every year goes by. And you look at NFTs and you look at the value proposition there, and if you can build the right story, you can build the right content, you build the right products, these are actually better collectibles. And so how do you optimize and create a better collectible for the end consumer? NFTs have already done that. We don't know if NFTs in gaming are going to work. We don't know if NFTs in software are actually going to work. We don't know. There's a lot of things and narratives that are around NFTs. We don't know if those are going to work yet. What we do know unequivocally today is, for the reasons I just explained, they're better collectibles. And because they're better collectibles, that is the value proposition that I'm optimizing for, is how do I create, a Pudgy penguin that is these 8,888 NFTs that live on the blockchain. They're my first editions, and how do I yield value to those first editions through the story and the brand that we build? To me, it's the only sustainable model that I can see today that I think has a long-term path for success.
Sorry, can I ask you to take off your badge? It keeps flashing light into my eyes over and over. I'm like bleeding blinded. That makes a ton of sense. And one thing, going specifically to the Pudgy Penguin example and like this new energy and revitalization that you've brought into it, what was sort of the impetus for you to say, hey, I want to double down on NFTs. This is what I care about. Is it because you had a trend or an affinity to collectibles growing up, or was it something else?
Yeah, I understand what it is to collect. I've been collecting for many years, fine art, watches, collectibles, figures. It's just a market that makes sense. And so from my perspective, I think ultimately I saw the value in NFTs, but how I got into this, I think, was really out of frustration. I thought everybody was claiming that they were building a brand and that they were executing, that they were doing things well, and then you really looked at the landscape and actually understood what they were doing, and they weren't doing much. And so out of frustration, I said, well, I'm going to buy this project and show you guys how it's done, and I think we've done a really amazing job in proving that thesis. Ultimately, how we came down to where I think the value proposition lies in NFTs is we bought Pudgy Penguins for $2.5 million about 18 months ago, and when assessing the situation, I have one goal, and that goal is to be the #1 NFT project in the world, and I know unequivocally we will be that. And when I peel back the layers and I look at what that means and how I'm going to achieve that, how am I going to get there, and how am I going to do it in a way that's not going to blow up in my face, this was the conclusion that I came to. This was the assessment that I knew it might take time. It might not be the situation that brings me to #1 in the next 6 months, but I know unequivocally it's the place that's going to get us there, because it's just a better value proposition, leveraging what has already worked for many, many years, or honestly hundreds of years at this point. Collectibles is not a foreign thing. And so this is kind of how we thought about it and how we kind of came to this thesis and this mission.
And why Pudgy Penguins? There were a lot of distressed NFT projects, a lot of different things that you could have come over and taken over. What was the call to these cute little penguins?
Yeah, I think if you just understand, but we see it now in the bear market, but there's communities forming and cultures forming. If you've been around for NFTs and you've seen NFTs for a while now, you know that Pudgy Penguins is a la in a place that I think very few projects can ever get to just out of its provenance and its cadence. It was one of the great projects that kicked off the 2021 NFT bull run. If you remember, it was all over CNBC, all of the news stations. It was the only NFT project to be printed in the New York Times. And this was before, the headlines were around Bored Apes or even CryptoPunks, and sure they might have been, in the alleys or through the grapevines. But I think one of the first mainstream projects to ever hit the shelves, as you would call it, in the space was a Pudgy Penguin. And that created a community and a culture that very few situations can lead you to acquire and purchase. And fundamentally, I think the IP is special. I made a tweet about this. I put it in my drafts, but maybe you guys will see it sometime soon. You can copy every tactic that we do. You can copy our social strategy, our product strategy. You can spew the same vision that I'm spewing. But at the end of the day, our character is just better. I had some really important meetings before I came to Korea and Japan. And everybody that we showed the Pudgy Penguin to freaked out. And they do this thing in Tokyo called kawaii. And they all would just say that when we show them the Pudgy Penguin. And that's our edge. We just have a better character. We have a character that makes sense in Asia. We have a character that makes sense in Europe. We have a character that made sense in America. And if you look at all the other NFT projects, which ones can you really say that about? It's always segmented to a certain culture. And I think Pudgy Penguins is the most universal IP in the entire NFT and Web3 space. And I think every data point supports that thesis.
It's a very confident vision. It's good to hear. It's good to hear that people actually care about bringing this beyond the current crypto demographic and the groups that are participating at the moment. But going back to the general theme of NFTs and the place that we find ourselves now, you said that digital collectibles are just better collectibles. They are representations that people can interact with in a better form than having baseball cards or having little figurines. What was the impetus to then take these digital collectibles and decide to do a physical representation, as you guys have been doing with these little figurines that you have?
Yeah, because there's this thing in crypto, and it's I think it's one of the Achilles heel with this entire space, is it almost is like forcing this contrarian narrative down people's throats, and it seems like almost everyone refuses to meet people where they are. And the truth is digital collectibles are not where we want them to be. And you have a responsibility as a project founder to bridge that gap. Everybody understands figures and collectibles and plushies and toys. Everybody understands social media content. You spend hours a day on your social medias. And why is nobody meeting these consumers where they are? Because crypto just waits for tides and waits for cycles and waits for FOMOs to create adoption. And I refuse to wait for adoption. I will create it. And that's the difference between me and I think everybody else in the space.
And how do these interactions with the figurines and the digital collectibles work?
So there's a couple of value propositions with our toys. So I think our toys are more than just toys for the sake of us being at Korea Blockchain Week. I'll kind of use a narrative that I don't really speak about often because it's a little taboo. But the toys and the collectibles are really a Trojan horse to getting people onto the blockchain. Every toy and collectible that we sell comes with a birth certificate and a QR code that leads people to sign up to Pudgy World and get their first NFTs for no cost. So a gasless experience, all you got to do is sign up via an email and a password. And for a $10 purchase in a toy, you can unlock 3 to 4 to 5 wearable NFTs that you can go then play around with in our Pudgy World. And that is just a unique value proposition that, hey, I buy this toy for $10, I can unlock these NFTs at no cost to me. And then when you compare that to other toys on the similar shelf, it gives us an edge in the traditional business where instead of pushing NFTs down people's throats, I'm really just leveraging the NFT technology as a better value proposition. And I think that's important, right? It's all about value proposition. It's all about what you can do for other people, not what they can do for you. I think a huge part of our success up until this point has been how much we've done in terms of either bringing people into the space or giving them products that they want. And ultimately, I think the toys are that vehicle. So on its face, you might look at a Pudgy Penguin toy and you might think to yourself, oh, this is a cute toy, people like it, people enjoy it. But if you actually understand the scale of it, you know, this is not a public number, but Pudgy Penguins is on pace to do $10 million in toy sales in our first 7 months in being around. That's $10 million of real revenue that has been generated through a product that makes people more familiar with our IP. That's sustainable, that's growable, that's forecastable, that's projectable. And I think that is very unorthodox in a space that is completely dependent either on royalties or mints or extracting liquidity out of their community. At some point you have to ask yourself, are you here to give to the space or are you here to take from it? And I know which side I'm on.
So to go from the digital to the physical pipelines, I'd love to hear a little bit about some of the things you guys have learned setting up physical manufacturing, some of the things that are sort of important to know when you're interacting in that world.
Yeah, this is kind of our bread and butter. So this is my experience, right? We came multiple, direct-to-consumer and consumer product brands now up until this point. My last one being probably one of the more successful ones. So we have experience here. I think ultimately, I'm not going to sit here on this stage and try to educate people on logistics and consumer pipelines and consumer behavior. I think you probably find a lot of Google videos that will do a better job. But what I can say is this is where you have to go if you actually want to win. If you actually want to be here 5 years from now, if you actually want to grow and be a staple and a pillar in Web3 and in NFTs, you have to go this route. Because this imaginary thesis and this imaginary narrative that you're just going to stay a digital product, it has never been done before, and it will be possible. I'm not saying it won't be possible. It probably will be the narrative 5 to 10 years from now. But what are you going to do until then? Twiddle your thumbs? I refuse to do that. I want to bring people into this space, I want to get them familiar with the blockchain. I want to get them familiar with NFTs. I want to get them familiar with Pudgy Penguins. I want to get them familiar with our product lines and what it is to be in the Pudgy ecosystem. And I don't want to wait for the cycles and for other people to do all the hard work. And so I think ultimately, if there's anything that I can kind of give you from a product standpoint, is just do it. And I think anybody can do that, right? I think there's plenty of different products that you can kind of scope out that your community will enjoy, and it's about the network effect. I made a tweet a couple months ago, but how powerful do you think it is to be a holder of a Pudgy Penguin, and then on your children's birthday or your nieces or nephew's birthday or a friends and family's birthday, you get them toys or collectibles or any other experiences in our product pipeline, and you get them to sign up and get their first NFTs, and you just go through the funnel that is the Pudgy toy funnel. There's nothing like it in this space. And so that you can share the joy of what you spend your time consuming. If you're a Web3 native, if you're an NFT consumer, if you're a Web3 consumer, you can then share that experience with people who are not necessarily on the same curve as you and get them familiar. Instead, everybody seems to take the path of, hey, download a MetaMask, or hey, come enjoy this experience. But you have to make it easy for people. Consumer behavior is about removing and abstracting the steps. If you understand consumer behavior and product pipelines, it's about as little friction as possible, as little amount of buttons, as little amount of attention curve and explanation and education possible. How do you make it easy for people? Well, the first thing that I can do as a Pudgy Penguin holder or as a Pudgy Penguin community member is I can just give you a Pudgy Penguin plush. And all of a sudden, I've made it that much more familiar and that much more easier for you to start consuming into our ecosystem. And so the space is just so far removed from that right now. And I think it's been our biggest Achilles heel. But as we've seen these last couple of months, there's been blow up after blow up, disaster after disaster, and now people are waking up. Now Luca, who all of a sudden it didn't really seem too feasible or too viable, or everyone would try to abstract this thesis, today, after the disasters that have transpired over the last 3 or 4 months, it seems like the most obvious one, and it is. And unfortunately, it had to take a lot of pain and suffering and financial losses for people to get it, but that's just the space that we're in. Ultimately, I believe more and more people will migrate towards this direction, as I believe it's the only model that I've come up with or that I've thought of, and that I think will actually work on a long-term horizon. And
So how do you go from the plushie to getting the people to have NFTs on the blockchain? Do you guys have a wallet that you've created, or do they get gas? How do they figure those steps out?
Custody wallet solution. So we have a couple announcements that I won't jump ahead of, but I mean, we've built our own custody solution. So all you need to do is buy a Pudgy toy, scan the QR code, sign up at Pudgy World via an email and a password, unlock your traits via the QR code, the code that was given to you, redeem your traits, we pay for the gas. We've been fortunate enough to get grants to cover for all of that stuff. And within 3 minutes of buying a Pudgy toy, if you follow the instructions clearly, you will have your first NFT. And this is not something that I preach to the public, but it very much is a Trojan horse. It's, hey, you know nothing about NFTs, you know nothing about Web3, I understand you think it's a scam, I understand you think it's taboo. Here's a Pudgy toy, follow the steps. And it's so familiar to what they're already doing. It's so in line with what Roblox is already doing. It's so in line with what Fortnite is already doing. All you have is this back-end layer of ownership, right? Because that's what crypto and blockchain is, right? Everyone tries to abstract it or tries to make it the forward-facing narrative. In reality, blockchain and crypto is the back end. It's the technology that powers this stuff. It's not the selling point. The selling point is accessibility. The selling point is ownership, right? It's not the fact that it was, built on this blockchain, on this layer 2 or this layer 1. And so I think eventually the space is slowly but surely going to mature. And I believe that NFTs are going to be the vehicle that bring, it sounds corny, but that bring the masses in. I think this is the pretty picture, the digital identity, the ownership with like a lot of the layers that crypto and coins have. I think this is really going to be the breakthrough technology and breakthrough narrative to really push this space forward in a tremendous way. I'm like unequivocally confident that's going to be the case. It's just about who's really building the right levers and the right facets to make that happen. And so on my end, it's consumer product and content. On others, it may be, SaaS and tooling. However, which narrative you want to do it, again, I think I have, I believe in my narrative for my own reasons. But I ultimately think the picture element and the emotional attachment that brings and the community aspect, owning an NFT, a JPEG, and wearing that as your identity is so much more powerful than owning 10,000 of some token and being in some Discord. The levers are two completely different levers. I think ultimately it's just how do we create that value proposition to get people excited, I think is really the key.
Are you able to disclose how much gas you've covered for folks?
Yeah, it's like I think $50,000 right now, but I think last time I checked, it was over 80,000 loot boxes opened, 29 or I think 30, just around 30,000 accounts created. So we have about 15% conversion on the sale to the thing, so we're working on optimizing that better. We're just crossing about 250,000 toys sold. We want to close out, obviously, toys in Q4 is really the year. I want to close out the year with over 500,000. I think we can do it easily. And so we have a lot of exciting things ahead.
One thing I wonder about is, as a lot of these NFT projects do well, the core collection tends to go up in price a lot, which makes it harder for like these net new people. Do you think that's going to be through vehicles like these customizable items and stuff that come with the plushies that let these other people have the blockchain experience or further collections down the line? How do you think about that side of things?
Yeah, I think right now we've created what I believe is the best value proposition for NFTs at scale. At our core, we have our first editions, which are 8,808 Pudgy Penguins. Then we have our little Pudgies and our rods. And ultimately, the one that costs you no money, that has no friction and no barrier to entry outside of a $10 physical toy purchase, which you'd probably buy anyway, is really the Pudgy World experience. Because the actual Pudgy Penguin that you unlock in Pudgy World is soulbound. So you can't trade it. You can only trade and exchange the traits. And I think that is going to be a benchmark for what we would consider a mass market NFT product to be. Because it's non-dilutive, it's additive. It really gives people a familiar experience, but it doesn't give them the benefits of what it really is to own a Pudgy Penguin. When you own a Pudgy Penguin, you can license it, you can monetize it. I can make it into a toy or put it into a piece of content. You have that opportunity. You get access to our events. You get access to the community in a deep way. You don't really do that if you buy a toy and you get some, Pudgy World traits. And so I think it's that defining layer and balance between the two that I think is really important. But ultimately, I'm really proud on its base for the MVP that we've created. I think it is the best mass market NFT solution today.
I think recently you probably saw this Mr. Beast controversy with I think it's called Creator Pass, where it has like some back end and blockchain, and he onboarded a bunch of very large creators, and these creators ended up rebelling once their audiences found out it had blockchain. When you speak to sort of like consumer audiences, what is the impression they're giving you when they think about NFTs? Is this maybe just localized to gaming, or is this more of a general sentiment?
It's I do an interesting metric, and I think one that the audience will appreciate, and one that people who listen to me speak, I've mentioned this a couple times, but there was an interesting thing in our Instagram growth strategy. If you guys don't follow us on Instagram yet, I highly recommend. I think it's the bar for NFT content, at least today, and I personally think it can get a lot better, and it will get a lot better. But today, right now, what's around, it's definitely the bar. We gain about 3,000 to 4,000 followers a day. And before that, about a couple months into the strategy, it wasn't working. And I identified why it wasn't working. And we had NFT in our bio, or Web3 was in our bio, I believe. Yeah, spreading good vibes across Web3 or the blockchain, or something along those lines. And we removed that. We were gaining maybe 300-400 followers a day. We removed that, and our follower growth 10x'd. And so, again, it's not the value proposition. It's not the hook. NFTs and blockchain and crypto can't be the defining hook to make this stuff accessible and to make this stuff exciting. It really is the back end. And so for me, I love the term digital collectibles. I think it's the one that really resonates and sticks with a lot of people. we've had backlash. The hardest thing for us, I think, is going into business meetings and trying to broker collaborations. The biggest and hardest hurdle of them all is the fact that we are an NFT and that we have that layer. And so there's definitely an educational curve that is taking place. But I think that comes with all new things. And unfortunately, in this situation, our space got hit with a cascade of inappropriate rollouts and quote-unquote scams, as we would call it. But it is what it is. I think every part of a decentralized type of ecosystem or business model is going to have that negative connotation and flip side. But this is where companies like ours are really imperative for the success of this. I believe, and I bear this responsibility right now on my shoulders, I believe it's our responsibility as Pudgy Penguins to break those barriers and to make it not taboo and to put in the retailers and the biggest retailers in the world and to get the biggest partnerships with the biggest companies and to get the best collaborations. And the more that companies like Pudgy Penguins succeed, the better that narrative will change. Because the guy who backed out of the Mr. Beast deal, he has a narrative about NFTs. He has an opinion about it. And rightfully so. We've done a lot of bad work up until this point. But I think if there's more people like Pudgy Penguins, more people like Bored Apes, more people that are coming out and creating interesting value propositions, I think that narrative will change. We just need more.
What do you think about NFT-Fi?
An interesting one. I think the beauty of tokens is the power that it gives you and the edge case that it gives you that is not traditionally or easily accessible. I follow this guy on Twitter named Cyrus. He's a pretty big Pudgy Penguin holder and supporter, but he posts all these amazing things of what Arcade is doing with certain loan mechanics, and that's beautiful. I mean, I'm talking about NFTs and NFTs as PFPs and IP and that narrative, but if you really abstract and you look at the most macro lens possible of what the upside is for NFTs, if you understand logistics and authentication, I mean, NFTs can power, indexing of shipments. I mean, it can get really big, really fast in terms of what the underlying technology can actually do. And so I think the opportunities are endless in that respect. And it's not just, IP. I think PFP specifically, I think, are best positioned to tackle the IP business. But there's definitely a lot more use cases for the technology than that.
And then my final question is, how do you see this core community of the 8,888 people melding with the overall vision of the consumer product? Are they the evangelists? Are they something else?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I think they're participants is kind of the narrative. I think the difference, if you really look at our value proposition and what we want to create, I'm trying to reinvent the world of IP. And what does that look like? I think today the IP business is built off of a relationship of brand and consumer. And I think the relationship that I want to create is a relationship between brand and participant, i.e., this year we'll do $10 million in Pudgy toy sales. Every single toy that we're selling is an NFT that lives on the blockchain. I licensed that from the holder. And I basically said, I'm going to give you a percentage of every time I sell these toys. And so every time I sell a toy, they get a percentage in perpetuity. That's never been done before. And we're the first people to do that. And so what is that relationship? That's not a relationship of brand and consumer. That's a relationship of brand and participant. And I think that's the way it should be. And so that's kind of how I look at that relationship and how I plan on inventing a new narrative, not just in NFTs and Web3, but in the traditional IP business as well.
Cool. Well, thank you for coming on stage. Good having you.
Thank you.